Greetings and welcome to MEC Live, a special edition. Today we're talking to Dr. Crawford, a very esteemed, very well-established professor here at Medgar Evers College and throughout the world. He's a wonderful professor, wonderful individual. And today we're talking to him about a special event that's going to take place in 2006 in Aswan, Egypt. The first World Conference, and it's called the First World Conference, Aswan, Egypt, 2006. Good day, Dr. Crawford.
Thank you very much, Orion, for inviting me to your show.
First of all, why is the conference Re-Educating the African in the 21st Century through balance, peace, and justice important?
Well, you know, it brings back into bold relief and into focus something that an event that took place in 1900. In 1900, H. Sylvester Williams, a Trinidadian lawyer, got together with W.E.B. Du Bois from the United States in 1900, in December, all the way into January, and they hosted what was called the First Pan-Africanist Congress. And the focus of that Congress, they discovered by that point in time that no matter where African people were found, they had one similar problem. The problem is, everybody wanted to use African people's resources, but nobody wanted to pay for it. And so that started a series of conferences called the Pan-Africanist Congress. And so in the whole spirit of Pan-Africanism, we thought that it's time, at this particular time in the 21st century, to refocus our efforts and to refocus on the message that was being transmitted by these men in London of 1900.
When you use the terminology African, the word African, how do you define an African?
Well, you know, a lot of people have difficulties with this term. People like to use other geographical spaces to define themselves. I'm a Trinidadian, Jamaican, Guyanese, I'm African American. But the fact remains that every people on this planet have an ancestral home. When we walk in the streets, if someone doesn't hear a peculiar accent peculiar to a specific geographical space, they could never tell where you're from. But your passport, as it were, is your physical identity. All black people, according to Peter Tosh, no matter where you come from, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. Africa is the ancestral home of all people of African ancestry deployed all over the face of the planet. And so when we talk about Africa, we're talking about people whose lineage, whose ancestral home is the continent of Africa.
Africans in the Americas, for example, are receiving the same education by and large like any other people. Given this, what is the problem with education of the African?
Well, there's a lot of problems with it. You see, education is not defined simply by being able to go to school, being trained, and to work for somebody else. That's how it's broadly defined. But education has but one purpose, according to John Henry Clark. First, it teaches the person to have power over him or herself. And once you have power over yourself, which means you have self-identity, which means you identify with your ancestral geographical space, then you could become a responsible handler of power. We, meaning people of African ancestry, both on the continent and in the diaspora, have very little control over ourselves and by extension over things that people do for and against us. So the educated person first must understand him or herself. This is not to the exclusion of hating other people or disliking. The first thing to do, self-preservation is man's first calling, and that is to preserve yourself. Loving yourself doesn't mean that you hate other people. And so it is this lack of self-love that somehow has infected us, that we need to refocus ourselves and start loving ourselves as African people.
And this conference is targeted at that energy, that vibe.
Well, that's one. I think that could be defined as the nexus of the conference. But remember, we live in the 21st century, and we have modern, advanced cyberspace technology. We, sadly to say, we are behind in that in that pursuit. We are behind in terms of producing things for ourselves. I cannot point to one commodity that has been produced by African people for African people, for example. Now, again, I have to re-invoke John Henry Clarke. This conference is hosted by the John Henry Clarke C.L.R. James African War Research Institute. And one of the things John Henry Clarke said to us, like a common refrain, that is to say over and over and over, he says that we don't even produce the pins to maintain the diapers for babies. We don't even produce diapers for ourselves. And even more importantly, we don't even produce one item of underwear for ourselves. So all this has to be part of our education. Do for self-reliance. Because when you have to rely on other people, the people will not produce things that are in your best interest. It's always produced in their best interest. And so therefore, again, when we talk about education, we're not talking about simply the ABCs. We're talking about the ability to survive in this modern world.
Well, I know for sure it's going to be very, very educational. And I know you is not going to be the only person that's going to be there, of course, or featured. Are you going to be featured actually? Or
no,
who else is going to be featured?
I'm going to be the engine behind this train that is not going to turn back. But we have some wonderful international and well-known speakers, beginning with Dr. Asa Hilliard from the University of Georgia. He could be described as one of the foremost thinkers, philosophical thinkers, in terms of education, not only about African people, but education as a whole. Then there's Abdul Alim Shabazz from Lincoln University. I mean, a bright, shining star and an armor in our community. Is a mathematician. He is responsible for training the large majority of African people in the United States and some outside the United States, training them PhDs in mathematics, an area which we somehow want to, or the general society tend to overlook. He is in computer and mathematics. Then there's Orny Smith, a linguist, someone who was brought into bold relief the whole genesis of our language, where it has come from, and how we should take control over that language. And Obata Shaka, a strategist. There are some wonderful women as part of this slate as well. Dr. Lily Golden, an African woman living in Russia, who is an art historian as a whole. She has been one of the first people of African descent to be educated around African culture as a scholar in Russia. And then there's Marta Vega. She is the director of the Caribbean Cultural Center here in New York. And she brings not only a Caribbean flavor to it, but she also brings the spirituality of the Caribbean, which comes out of Africa into this whole mix.
Tell me something, what is the significance of this conference being held in Aswan, Egypt?
Well, first of all, when we think about Egypt today in particular, we think about every other group of people except African people. Now, I know I could go on, but I would just want to give a snapshot here. Egypt is a child of Africa. There's no doubt about it. And this child has been transported along the longest river in the world, which is the Nile River, about approximately 4,112 miles long. The people came from the southern part, that is to say, in areas around the Great Lakes region, all the way up this river, bringing their technology, bringing their understanding of science, bringing their spirituality, bringing their cosmology, and brought to bear this flower that we know today that the world can never forget. The only of the ancient civilizations where we find so much of the information still intact. Russia, for example, could not have been such an advanced nation in its technology had they not have what is called the Moscow Papyri. Those are Egyptian mathematical treatises, should I say, appropriated out of Africa. The architecture in the United States, for example, particularly in Washington, D.C., could not have been as powerful as it is had they not copied or appropriated generic copies out of Egypt, the obelisk, the pawn around it, the whole concept of the White House, all this comes out of there. But the point is, it's about the people. The people responsible, and I have no compunctions about saying this, the people responsible for building this great civilization a civilization that flourished over 3,000 years along the banks of the Nile River, are African people. Now, they gave the world its highest civilization, which lasts 3,000 years. We are the children. We are the offsprings of those people. And I think rather than going and reinvent the wheel, I think it's important that we go back to the source. So Aswan is the source of Egyptian culture, as it were. And so what better place to go than to immerse yourself in the source? Get yourself reinvigorated by the spirits from those sources. So that's the reason why we chose Aswan, because Aswan is the only place still remaining with Egyptian, African culture, Nubian culture intact.
Wonderful. And I had the opportunity to see a couple of some of your print ads, some of the video promo that you had. There are two images in there, one with a male, one with a female.
Yes, yeah.
Give me the significance of that.
Well, the first significance that I always make sure that I portray when I do anything is the whole concept that comes out of Egypt. It's called MAD, is balance. Truth, justice, righteousness, reciprocity. Now, if you're talking about balance, for example, there cannot be a male without a female. So the two images, the female image I've chosen is the image of Queen T. Most people don't know about her, but let me quickly tell you about her. Queen T is 18th dynastic period, and she comes from one of the most brilliant families in all of Egyptian history. Her son is Akhenaten, the reformer, the great reformer, who refocused Egypt on monotheism. His wife is the beautiful Nefertiti that people know very little about. All they talk about is her beauty. But she was a co-consort with Akhenaten. Then Tutankhamun, who came to the consciousness of the world because a British archaeologist, travelogue person found him. So this family, and then the father of Akhenaten, Amenhotep III, he himself is quite a brilliant individual. So this is a very, very respected family. So I decided I was going to put the face of Queen T is the female face of the conference. The other face that you see is the greatest of all the pharaohs that comes out of Egypt, even though he gets, in colloquial terms, he gets a bad rap. That's Ramesses II. Ramesses II, it was the greatest builder. He built more edifices in Egypt, but not only building, he fought more than any other pharaoh to maintain the national and the political boundaries of Egypt. Ramesses II reigned over Egypt for 67 years. He seared over 150 sons. That people might find that quite interesting. But Ramses was an architect. And so Ramses has left for us many great architectural edifices. For example, one of the greatest pieces that ever came under his watchful eyes as an architect is the rock-cut temple at Abu Simbel that was cut out of the face of a mountain with 460 feet high images of Ramses sitting there. But then bisecting these images is the god Ra-Horakhti. It's a solar temple. At the equinox, twice a year, the sun rises and shines through the passageway, the corridor as it were, and illuminates the faces of three of the deities in there. One is Ra-Horakhti, the other was Ramses himself, and the other deity is Amun. Ptah is not a southern deity, he's not a solar deity. So when the sun rises, the sun at the equinox, it illuminates the faces of it. And then next to it is another rock-cut temple, the rock-cut temple of Queen Nefertari II, his most beautiful wife, who he married. She comes from right on the border between Egypt and Nubia. So Ramses, when one goes to Egypt, as soon as you leave Cairo airport, you will see a 60 feet high statue of Ramses. Ramses is everywhere in Egypt. And so, having been one of the longest reigning pharaohs, the pharaoh who was longer than was Pepi II, but Ramses has left a greater imprint on Egypt than anyone else. So, and of course, we don't have time to talk about his battles of Qadish that are illustrated all over Egypt.
Right now we're going to pause for a short break and we'll be right back. Stay tuned.
Meet Brother brothers and sisters from the African world at the First World Conference in Aswan, Egypt from July 19th to July 25th, 2006, Re-Educating the African.